Well, the war started in Europe while I was in high school, a senior year in high school. I got out of high school when I was 17. That was 1938. We were not in the war yet, obviously, but I don't think it took a very smart man to figure out that we were going to be. After 1 year of college, I saw all those fancy advertisements for be an aviation cadet. Well, I lasted on for practically the entire primary training period. And then I had the misfortune of trying to taxi an airplane where there's a big ditch. And that's just rather disastrous to the landing gear, as you know. And so I had all kinds of check rides, and I finally washed out. So I was going to go join the RAF. And so sometime the old captain there got a hold of me one day and said, Mr. Van Kirk, I understand you plan to join the RAF. And I says, yes, sir, that's correct. And he says, well, you can do that if you want to, but you're going to be dead within a year. Kind of got your attention in a hurry and everything of that type. So I said, well, why do you say that? And he says, because they're going to send you up to Canada, give you a little bit of training, and you're going over to England, you're going to fly against the best brilliant pilots in the world. And he says, you're not going to make it. So I says, well, I thank you for your advice and everything, but what do you plan to suggest? He says, I think you ought to go to navigation school. So that's when I went to navigation school. I was only in the navigation school about a week, maybe less, 10 days, something of that type. And they called out 30 names all of a sudden. And I says, my God, what did I do now? So these 30 guys report and this sort of thing. They said, you 30 guys are going to go through this navigation school in 1/2 the normal time. And I says, oh, we are? I says, what are we going to miss? So anyhow, they had a heavy bombardment group, B-17 group, waiting to go in Sarasota, Florida. And they had no navigators. So that's why we were going through in 1/2 the time. And when I got to the 97th Bomb Group, the first time I met Paul Tibbets, I was not assigned to his plane at that time. We formed a crew and everything else. We had a fellow named Rocket as the pilot of our crew. I can remember first day we got out the airplane, I met Tom Furby in the nose of a B-17 of that airplane. Tom Furby and I were best friends for life until the day he died. We took all of our training in this country then with Rocket as pilot. We got to England then, and Rocket was one of these guys that refused to believe that when a pub over there said we're out of beer, they were out of beer. Rocket says, you guys have beer. Let me go back in the room there and find out what it is and everything. He made a horse's butt of himself, and so he was court-martialed. We were a crew without a pilot. Tibbets, by that time, I think he was operations officer of the group. And if he needed a crew, so we made a very nice marriage. And I always remember my wife saying to Paul, how did you get to be flying with Dutch and Tom? Paul always said, he says, they were so screwed up, I wanted to see if anybody could straighten them out. There was a mission to Meaux, France. That particular mission, we were leading the mission and everything else, and we got attacked head on. And I'll point out right now, Tom Furby and I, as navigator and bombardier, never hit a damn thing. We would come back up to our ankles in gun shells and everything, and to my knowledge, we never hit anything. The safest place for a German pilot to be was up there flying against us. Tibbets left our group in about sometime in January of 1943. Tibbets was sent back to the States, where he got involved in test work with the B-29. Tibbets was picked to take command of the group that was going to be trained to drop atomic weapons. Tibbets, when he used the code name Silver Plate, he could get anybody he wanted. He could get any material he wanted. He had more power than the Chief of Staff of the Air Force has today, probably. He called Tom, asked Tom to be his group bombardier, and called me and asked me to be his group navigator. And during this course of this conversation, he said, it'll mean going overseas again. He says, but if it works, we have the potential to either significantly shorten or end the war. And he says, I can't tell you any more than that. I thought about it a little bit, I must admit. I was going to have a chance to join two of my best friends, Paul Tibbetts and Tom Farabee again. We're going to go overseas again over to the Pacific, but I'm going to be in B-29s, which is going to be a safer airplane, easier combat and everything else than I would have been in B-17s. So I says, why not? You know, go there and do something for your country again. So I accepted. I finally got my orders, transferring me to the Silver Plate Project, Wendover, Utah. And I noticed that they were dated 2 days before I had agreed with Paul that I accepted the job. I says, so much for the damn volunteering, Paul. And he says, well, I knew you'd accept, and everything of that type. I says, well, I admire your faith in me, that's all I can say. We did not know what our mission was, unless you guessed it. But by that same token, if you had any intelligence whatsoever and could put two and two together, and if you didn't know we were dropping an atomic bomb, playing around with atomic energy, you were pretty stupid. Because number one, we were told we were going to go out and drop a weapon that would essentially destroy an entire city. Number two, you always saw atomic physicists running around your base. We had a meeting with one of the scientists early on. This was like early January of 45. And this scientist sat there and told us, we think the airplane will be okay if you're 11 miles away when the bomb explodes. It might have been 9 or somewhere 9, 10, 11 miles. And I can remember looking at the gun and I says, what the hell do you mean when you think? You think we'll be okay? I says, this is my life you're playing with. And he says, we don't know. He says, it might be 50. He says, some people would say it's going to set off a chain reaction in the atmosphere, in which case you guys are dead. I says, oh, thanks, buddy, and everything of that type. But it set the tone for all the rest of our training, and that is, how do we put distance between the bomb explosion and us? The day before, in the morning, they called us in for the briefing. And, you know, guys running around with Tommy guns and everything of that type, and you get your targets and times and, you know, all that sort of crap. And then they tell you to go get some sleep, and they're going to call you about 10 o'clock for the final briefing and the final breakfast. How they expected to tell you you're going to go out and drop the first atomic bomb and then tell you to go get some sleep is absolutely beyond me. I know Tibbetts didn't sleep. I know Farabee didn't sleep. I know I didn't sleep. How do I know that? Because we're all three in the same poker game. Now, when we get down to the airplane, that's our first big surprise. We get down to the airplane, and the airplane is all lit up by cake lights. People running all over, interviewing, taking pictures, and all that sort of stuff. I took a look at it, and I said, my God, this looks like a Hollywood premiere. And Dick Nelson, who was our radio operator, comes from Southern California, looked at it and he says, seems more like a supermarket opening to me. We arrive at Iwo Jima, and we just make one swing of the island, and Sweeney's on one wing, and George Marquardt is on the other wing. Very smooth. And then we just take off in Japan, climbing very slowly. And just before we went through 10,000 feet, Morris Jepson went back into the bomb bay, took out the green plug, I guess is, and put in the red plug. And the bomb was now electrically armed. And I remember we're sitting there, and they have a box sitting right there alongside of me. And I looked over at Morris one time, and I said to him, Morris, I said, what happens if all those green lights go out on that box and all the red lights come on? He says, Dutch, we're in a hell of a lot of trouble. They didn't tell us what to do if we could not drop it visually. But the inference was there. For God's sakes, don't bring it back to the base with you. I could pick out the city of Hiroshima from a good 50 miles away. Tom Fairby and I sat there and we compared notes on everything. Here's the Air Bridge, here's the aiming point. Deke Parsons came up, Paul came up. Everybody identified the target. And Tom Fairby got any sights. Took the bomb 43 seconds till it exploded at about 1,800 feet over Hiroshima. Everybody on that airplane was timing it in some way. And you had a watch like I had, or you had 1001, 1002, whatever. I think most people concluded it was a dud. I really do, because it seemed to take, I think in the excitement and everything, you're kind of wound up. And time seems to go faster or something. Suddenly there's a bright flash in the airplane, like a photographer's bulb that goes off in a dark closet. So now you knew the bomb had worked. We kept going away from it. And very shortly after that, the first shock wave hit us, and somebody on the airplane called out flak because they thought it felt like a shock wave or a burst of flak in very close in to a B-17. And the tail gunner about that time called up and says, it was not flak, it was a shock wave, here comes another one. The tail gunner said the bomb set up visible shock waves, apparently similar to what you get when you drop a pebble in a still pool of water. And they were visible to the tail gunner, and he could sit back there and tell you exactly when they're going to hit the airplane. This large white cloud, you've all seen pictures of the mushroom cloud, had formed and was up well above our altitude already. I'd guess 45, 50,000 feet. And if you look down below that cloud, the entire city of Hiroshima was covered with thick black smoke, dust, and everything. I describe it as a pot of boiling black oil. That's about the way it looked. And all you could see from the city was fires that were burning out around the periphery. We did not see how the Japanese could stand up to power like this for more than several days, if that. And in fact, Dick Nelson started monitoring the radio. He thought he might hear word about the war being over before we ever got back to Tinian. It was that close and everything else. Because we just thought the Japanese would have to accept the terms of unconditional surrender. But they did not, and therefore the second one. And by the way, this was right after we had dropped hundreds of millions of leaflets over 20 different cities in Japan, warning them of a rain of ruin from the air. There is no doubt that we would have lost many thousands of people in an invasion. I don't know whether it had been 1 million people. I don't know whether it had been 500,000 people or not. All I know is it would have been an awful lot more than I was willing to accept. And I think that most Americans were willing to accept. None of us had any regrets about what we did. A lot of people will say, would you do it again? My answer is, under exactly the same conditions that existed at the time we dropped the bomb. If they asked me to drop another one, I would.